When you adapt, and people think adapting is doing the book, I don't think so. I think adapting is taking an animal that lives at sea and bringing it to land. You're adapting to land. In Gothic romance, the castle, ultimately, the edifice, it comes to represent the human head. And every part of what it is to be human has a dialogue in it. Feminine, masculine, death, love, supposition.
Impulse versus rational. I mean, all those
absolutely.
things.
Well, the fact is the entire Romantic movement was reacting to industrialization.
Shame is education. It's coming to recognize your place in the world. That happens in all these movies. It happens in Pinocchio, in Kronos,
and
Hellboy, and in this. And I want to ask you about, because this idea that knowledge is a painful thing, I've never seen it more profoundly sort of like rendered in the movie than in this Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that you have a character that has all the words he thinks he needs, which is Victor, and they're all hollow. And yet the creature has many less words, but they all mean something to that creature. I've been obsessed with this, and people say obsessed now because they Google for 10 minutes, but this is truly 50 years of my life. I wanted to have a dialogue with the Romantics, the origins of the movement, how it reflects times when they are direly necessary, which is now also, but also it was biographical for Mary Shelley, it's biographical for me.
Both of those performances and those characterizations are predatory, and there's something about that in your version of Victor too.
Yeah, but he believes he is the hero, and I think that's one of the things that I'm 61, and up until I was 45 or so, I thought I was, to borrow a Dickensian phrase, I thought I was the hero of my narrative, and I turned out to be the villain.
Thank you, and I realize that's not for me. Please help me welcome Sundance habitué, Oscar-nominated director, Oscar-winning director in 2 different fields. I think Guillermo del Toro. Yes, thank you for being here.
Michael Moore.
So when you made Oppenheimer, did you really?
Yes.
You know, and we've talked about this after you showed me the movie. I think since I've known you, we've been talking about Frankenstein in one way or another, haven't we?
Yeah.
And I just think that opening line, or the one that's with "You will rejoice,"
yes.
those opening letters, I think, because that tone of sort of ironic foreboding in those letters is what the movie starts with. I mean, it's such a tonally perfect adaptation of that. We talked about this. It fits into almost everything you do, this idea of commerce versus freedom, institution versus the individual,
patronage,
absolutely, and rebuilding oneself. And the thing that this does is it doesn't let the monster off the hook for taking lives. It just started with savagery. It's to remind us where he was born. And I couldn't. We talked about the letters when when you showed it to me, and I just love the epistolary tone of this.
Yeah, it is. That's the idea. The idea was. When you adapt, and people think adapting is doing the book, I don't think so. I think adapting is taking an animal that lives at sea and bringing it to land. You're adapting to land. So you are trying to have a piece that A, will have a dialogue with the book, B, a piece that will illuminate areas of the book that have not been rendered on film, which were plentiful.
Almost all of them.
and are still plentiful, but also one that I've been obsessed with this. And people say obsessed now because they Google for 10 minutes. But this is truly 50 years of my life. I wanted to have a dialogue with the Romantics, the origins of the movement, how it reflects times when they are direly necessary, which is now also, but also like it was biographical for Mary Shelley, it's biographical for me. So in many ways, that is like a hall of mirrors for me, but it's something that has grown for all those decades into what was presented. So adapting it, 9 to 5, rigorously. It took over 2.5 years to do that script, but to come up with the ideas took the 50 years. So there's so much I can talk about this, and we will, because we have an hour and a half, so you're screwed. There is nothing that was decided into structuring that was not thought about for that long, because the trick for me was, if you simply render what was done before, you're doing taxidermy. But if you are trying to make that animal live again and behave and be seen in its living form by a new audience, then you have to do this, which I had done in the past, I would say, with Pinocchio in a way, and with the Monte Cristo adaptation that I did that hasn't yet been produced with Francis Coppola and Roman Coppola and Kit Carson in the 90s. Yeah?
Yes, Kit, yeah, of course.
Kit, we said, let's make it, well, it was Roman's instinct. He said, let's make it a Western. And that was a great instinct, because Monte Cristo, when it was created, it was not a classic. It was a genre piece. And it was Dumas owed money, as he often did, from gambling to different publishers. And he had a quarter of a travelogue, a quarter of a true crime of a man that was killing his enemies, and he combined them, and he made Monte Cristo, etc., etc. But the idea is, if you approach it from a point of view where you want to serve the essence, well, one of them is the fact that it's an epistolary novel, so you want the passages with the voice narrating them to have different identities, visually, tonally, and so forth.
But also this thing we talked about, which you really found a way to render, is you really make it Oscar's character, Victor, he's got to be a Byronic figure. Yeah. And that had never been done. He's always been this kind of weird, creepy, basically signaling to you that he was a defiler of flesh character before, and you've got to make him a romantic figure before we can feel what he's capable of. And then we talked about how that sequence in the operating theater, he's basically doing David Bowie in there. He's playing a concert.
Yeah, well, I said to Oscar, we're going to shoot Victor doing or talking about what he does like a concert. Because to me, he's as much an artist as he is a scientist. And I want to show that A, it is not easy, and B, everything starts going wrong. But the fact is, of all the Dr. Frankenstein that have been portrayed, I really, the one I like the most, there's two I adore. One is Peter Cushing, who's basically a sociopath, and he is the villain of the Hammer movies. He's the most dangerous guy. And I adore the completely gonzo Udo Kier one in the Paul Morrissey. Is so.
I love that movie so much.
Me too.
The first time I ever got scared in the movie was that beheading in the forest
with the scissors,
where you can see like the little person in the suit and they cut the plastic head
but
off of it.
I adore it. I think there is great adaptations of Frankenstein, of course, many. But as far as the Doctor, for me, the two that have an origin in some way, deranged or sociopathic, were those two.
But both of those performances and those characterizations are predatory.
Yeah.
And there's something about that in your version
Yeah.
of Victor too.
Yeah, but he believes he is the hero. And I think that's one of the things that I'm 61, and up until I was 45 or so, I thought I was, to borrow a Dickensian phrase, I thought I was the hero of my narrative, and I turned out to be the villain.
Yes, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times.
Yeah,
yes.
and only, and life resolves by revealing to you that you are your main antagonist.
But it's interesting because
and I wanted that,
because that's the corollary you set in emotion with Victor and the creature. I don't want to call it a creature.
No, that's
I don't want
fine.
to call it a monster because
I like creature.
But I think the part of it to me, I think of it as being, I think of it as a being, because it's a character who you're very meticulous about.
That's a great way of calling it.
Because we see his physical and emotional evolution, which take place on two very different tracks, and that sort of sense of, even in the savagery at the beginning, there is this awful sense of regret that very much takes us back to the book and that opening of those first letters.
Oh yeah.
And I've never seen anybody adapt it because, again, Victor is he thinks he's a hero, but he's still as predatory as as the Keir and Peter Cushing were.
Well, the thing for me is the way the screenplay is constructed. There are many things that have symmetries, and then you break the symmetry. We have two narratives plus the narrative of the captain. In the book, the captain looks at Victor as a saint. He's almost in love with Victor. And then he calls him, I've never seen anyone more saintly and more kind, and he breaks into tears at the least provocation, blah, blah, blah. And then the narrative...
That's the Byronica. I mean, that love of, that romantic sort of infatuation.
Between them. But I think that, I wanted to encompass all the romantic movement, also Caspar David Friedrich, Keats, the poetry of Byron, et cetera, et cetera. But, and Victor carries that. For me, the main choice with him is Gothic romance, as such, was birthed out of very much a fascination with two things: the ruins of the south of Europe, the ruins in Spain, in Italy. In fact, the first novel in Gothic romance, The Castle of Otranto, is born out of a fascination with an engraving by Giovanni Battista Piranesi, So I wanted to have
those
this
engravings all in the house on your set.
and on Victor, yeah. But there was a fascination with the Latin streak. Anne Radcliffe, who was one of the main sort of exponents of the Gothic romance, her novel, one of her most famous ones, is called The Italian. When you read The Monk by Matthew G. Lewis, it happens in Madrid. So I said, let's give them the full Latin. let's take this Victor and make him different from his father, from the fact that he is not like him, and this origin weighs on him in this land. And Oscar and I were talking about being fathers and having fathers. And I was talking about the generational pain, how it passes through people that, to quote Franz Kafka, are doing the best they can. And he says, Kafka says, my father did the best he could, but he was obviously abused when he was little. And he says, but I was little too. And I think that pain is in the film. And you have two people that go through the same pattern of destruction, but they come to completely different ends. The creature, I find it very beautiful, and we can talk about where it comes from and all that, but the fact that he is originally kind to those that are kind to him, violent to those that are violent to him, but at the end, he's kind to those that were violent to him.
Sure.
And he finds the grace of the sun. That's it, the one grace we all get. As long as the sun comes up, we go on. But all this, I mean, I think we could stay here for a much longer time. It's so personal, and so it bounces all over the things that I'm curious about of the romantic movement.
But it's also this thing that runs through your work so often, which is shame and guilt.
Oh yeah, that's my law firm.
Well, they can get a lot of work in D.C. these days, but and those two polarities are embodied by the being.
Yeah.
That he is the best and worst of Victor, in the same way Victor
they are one and the same. I mean, when we started coding the movie visually, I wanted two main things to be coded in the movie: the circle, right, and the mirror. So if you see the movie again, Victor is multiplied in a mirror before he creates the creature.
I thought that was you. I mentioned this to you. I thought that was you doing Ken Russell's Women in Love, where the mirrors are around so much, and those guys both also represent the best and worst of each other.
Which is the Ken Russell I most admire. Well, my favorite Ken Russell is the Devils, obviously.
Your law firm is Shame and Guilt, so yes, that makes all the sense in the world.
But we coded, and so then when the creature is born, they appear in the same mirror. Oftentimes, the Medusa is the only monster that is killed by a mirror.
Like after they fight, we see Alan and Oliver in that same mirror.
Yes, and it's obviously Some of the way you pass pain is you reconstruct a child, and you pass on what was done to you in some form, laterally or obliquely or directly. And I think Victor is creating life. I mean, one of the main things in the novel is to create life without the agency of woman, which I think Mary Shelley very strongly, it figures in the novel. Many things figure in the novel, her miscarriages, her role in society, and we can talk about all this. But this idea, he has this pregnant little ivory figure, which in fact is historically accurate. People didn't know what they were used for. They were used for a doctor to have dialogue with a patient, a female patient, without pointing at the figure, so as to not touching the woman. So there's a pregnancy in that little figure, and he finally constructs the full version of that in the lab, and he did it himself. But what he's doing is giving birth to a son to pass the pain that was given to him in the exact same manner. And I think that the growth of the creature, which is in the novel almost identically as a process, I said, well, let's.
But you shift the chronology.
The chronology goes to the 50s because of, and we can talk about that because that's the first thing I decide on a screenplay is where and when, and it takes me several weeks. So the first step on writing a screenplay is my house is a library, and I have the working library table. I go through every section of the house gathering the books. I gathered an 1835 medical library. I gathered Friedrich, Fuseli, any of the Romantic painters that would help. I did portraiture from the period from 1815 to 1860, et cetera, and then I decide, okay, Crimean War is going to happen in exactly here because the fuel engine is not yet functional, but is the exact date when 7 years later in France these studies will be. So he's in the cutting edge of fuel engines. Out of the Napoleonic Wars come many alternative treatments. Homeopathy is invented in the Napoleonic Wars by Hahnemann.
There's also a shift in the economy then too. And
There's the industrialization now is full on, and the Romantic movement is framed by war. Mary Shelley's mother goes to the French Revolution, and frames the turmoil of the world through that, and the Napoleonic Wars are framing the Romantic movement in many ways, and we know that the war in Europe and it was transcontinental eventually. Byron dies in Greece and so forth, fighting for independence. So there's the first few people that gallop through Waterloo. Most of them are poets. Famously, the aphorism at the end of the movie is part of the Ballad of Childe Harold, which is precisely the chapter that Byron writes after galloping through Waterloo, so et cetera, et cetera. So, is jiving with the material to change the date to the 1850s.
It's funny you're talking about this. I was thinking about that thing that runs through Monte Cristo and several other of his novels, which is part of this and also part of your work, is that a castle is never a home.
Oh, no, of course. No. In fact, in Gothic romance, the castle, ultimately, the edifice, it comes to represent the human head. And every part of what it is to be human has a dialogue in it. Feminine, masculine, death, love, the juxtaposition.
Impulse versus rational. All those
absolutely.
things.
Well, the fact is the entire Romantic movement was reacting to industrialization.
Yeah, and for trying to plant a flag for humanity.
Which,
that's why blood runs through so much of the Romantic poets.
Which is, you can see, we have done great advances to say no to machines.
Why Ike? Whatever do you mean?
but what I think is we are in a similar place.
Do you?
Yeah, I think so, because it's more urgent than ever to ask the same questions. What makes us human?
But the artists were asking that question, and staking a claim that humanity could not even exist side by side with machines. That there had to be human hands on everything. And I don't know that we're there now.
No. We should get there.
Okay.
We should get there.
Yes,
I think that, but one of the main things that is also similar, for very different reasons, it was the suppression of emotion, particularly in England. So I remember Byron said emotion, and if everything else fails, shock them. That was the Byronian desire to shock society into the marriage of love and death, two things that before graveyard poetry did not exist in that manner. And the symbolist and the idea of in the 1850s, I wanted to have also this world that was in the turmoil of war, technological advances, but the Romantic movement was already installed. So that was very important for me. It was a euchronism, which means it's a time that is never was.
But here's something I want to ask you about, because I was taken by this when I saw the movie. In fact, we talked about it for a very long time. That opening is the biggest action sequence you've ever staged.
No, Pacific Rim is.
No, because you actually feel a sense of physical violation in the way you don't in Pacific Rim. I mean, because those guys are covered by those things.
Well, I would say Blade 2 and this, yes.
But I felt that
but we made it. Every single thing you see is done physically. There's no digital doubles. Like every single action that I said I want to do all with wires, everything with wires. Move the ship for real.
Yes, exactly.
The ship needs to move entirely with all the crew on top, and it has to be physical.
I mean, that sense of immediacy in this, I've never felt you do anything like that before.
No. That it is the biggest, and the main thing is if you know action and how to shoot it, the wire trick has an arc. It goes like this and then accelerates and then lands. Now, if you lift somebody, it's a hard takeoff and then a hard landing. So we spent months using the wire to really reproduce what it would feel to lift somebody with a single hand and smash them on the ground. And I said, none of the things is going to be done with a digidouble. When he throws him off behind his back, just discarding him, and he lands on the fire, and he throws him with one hand. And when he sinks in the ice, which is a quote to the Hammer Dracula, right? We really created this iceberg that was controlled by remote control, and he sank in the water. Everything was done with that desire to also because the movie wanted to open with you, number one, saying the creature is very destructive and fearful, one side of the story, and ending the movie knowing why he did it. You see, if the most urgent thing is the dialogue between the way you perceive something or someone and the way you perceive it when you know the story.
But that's something you've done a lot. I mean, going back to Chronos, which is action and then motive.
Yes.
I mean, and that's Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, we were reacting to the display and the carnage, and I've never been which is not to say you've not staged action before. That wasn't what I said, but I've never seen you stage action in a way that felt so immediate and it's like such a violation of our audience space.
Well, it's also to me the important thing is that's why I wanted to open Pinocchio with the line, by the time Master Geppetto created Pinocchio, he had already lost a son. That's the opening line. So you go, okay, he's going to lose a son, and he's going to create Pinocchio out of that. I haven't seen this one. So if you open this, you see the ship, which is vital to the novel, but the attack on the ship obviously does not exist. But it proves the creature's size and so forth. And then what I like is the idea of mixing brutality and beauty from my first movie to this one. And it can be Pan's Labyrinth, Devil's Backbone, Shape of Water. I think the bittersweet of the brutality and destruction and beauty is what creates, in the same way that the Romantics said, can we combine love and death? And because they are also two sides of the same emotion. And the romantics were very radical. I mean, people think about romantics, they think about Fabio carrying a woman in an airport novel cover, but
So that's not what you're trying to do.
no. So no, but they were iconoclasts. They were really almost punk.
But they were also obsessives. I mean, they were true
Yes.
obsessives. I mean, use that word to start with. And they were all obsessed with the idea that none of them will live past the age of 30. That's the punk. They're flinging themselves into every word they wrote, every drink,
Every
they had.
experience they had.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, when people think, there's many misconceptions about.
There's no softness in capital R romantics.
Not at all. I mean, may I remind everyone that Percy Shelley is married when he meets Mary Shelley, who was 16, and then he promptly falls madly in love with her, as does she, and when everything seems impossible to their romance, he climbs up the steps, breaks into her room with a bottle of laudanum, and says, "You drink this and die," and pulls out a gun, "and I'll blow my brains right now." That's the romantics. And then he says, "Why don't we elope at 5 a.m. dressed in black and go to the continent? Why not?" And they also have so much tragedy. 3 miscarriages in a row, right off the bat, the suicide of his wife in the Serpentine in London.
Which is a death that basically is sort of the thread that runs through all the romantics.
Absolutely. And suicide and the death of an infant carry two things that are very interesting to know. When Mary Shelley loses the first couple of children, they go into the ground without a name. And when a suicide goes into the ground, it goes without a name, because the family didn't claim suicides in order not to bring the scandal. So,
And also as a way of saying they weren't going to heaven.
Well, but they didn't want a record.
Yeah.
People died mysteriously.
But that's that's this thing I was talking about that runs through your work, which comes from that sort of simultaneity of shame and guilt.
Of course. And look, when you're talking about Frankenstein, for me, it's a religion. I was 7 years old when I saw the original Whale, the James Whale, on a Sunday after church. So I went to church. I was raised very, very, very brutally Catholic. And when I say brutally, I mean it. Like, I was raised by my grandmother was the equivalent of Carrie's mom in the Stephen King, in the Brian De Palma. She used to put bottle caps upside down in my shoes for me to bleed for Jesus. I was a spokesperson for the Virgin Mary. I was an altar boy. And one fine day on a Sunday, I come from church, and on Sundays they showed monster movies and on TV all day. And I saw this amazing film where I finally found Jesus. When Boris Karloff crosses the threshold, that was my Messiah. And at 11 I read the novel, and at 11 I said, I'm gonna make this movie, because I was already a Super 8 auteur. And I said, I'm gonna make this movie. It took a lot of Super 8 cartridges and 50 years to make it, but I said, and every movie I make, from Kronos to this one, it has Frankenstein elements.
Oh, completely. But I think finally, and I think we talked about this too, what hit me so much about that opening action sequence, that battle, that fight for the monstrous humanity, that creed occur, is that there's no sound of metal in it. It's all this. I mean, it's so elemental. It's and it hit me as, oh my God, that's the kind of thing you hear as a kid. Mm-hmm. You go out in the forest. I mean, it's organic in a way that I found completely terrifying.
You mean in the opening fight?
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
The sound of eyes, for example, we wanted to open with a visual and a sound design that told you nothing. And one of the sounds that we reproduce is the cracking of the eyes up north. Fortunately, we shot in Canada part of it, which made it very easy. But the way we broke sound and image in the movie, the opening prologue and epilogue, which happened with the Danish ship, is done in only 3 colors: white, blue, and gold. That's it. And then you go to the childhood, which is white, black, and red. and red is the mother and the quest for immortality, and that's the only color that carries through the movie, you know. And then Victor's narrative is all inundated with color, with all the garish colors that Victorian era had. People think about Victorian era and they think about this pale pastel BBC series of people behaving well. Victorian era was incredibly garish and incredibly accumulative, and it was new wealth, and it was the desire
the
to
artisan
showcase
class
it.
spending all the money.
All the money.
Yeah.
At once, you went into a Victorian parlor. There was things on top of things on top of things, but then the creature
Everything edged in gold.
in gold or green, which was poisonous back then. A lot of people died from green wallpaper, but because it had cyanide. But then the monster comes in, and the narrative becomes a fairy tale, and you have moss and straw and wood, and the camera style is different, and the sound is different. One of my favorite passages is the creature alone in the forest, zero music and the creaking of the trees, you know, and the sound of the distant crows that gave birth to the creature, blah, blah, blah. And the animals teach him everything he needs to know about the world. Because in the book, he learns through the cruelty of man, and a long passage where the family of the blind man discusses capitalism and racism, and it's a very long passage. But I said, why he should learn through the animals, the deer, the wolf, the
But you said that
mice.
notion by Christoph Waltz, as Victor thought. I mean, he is that poisonous capitalist that the blind man talks about.
Well, that I was really interested in this, how the altruistic goals get corrupted by the least altruistic financiers. Not that this has anything to do with the movie business,
Or politics,
or politics, but it's essentially, first of all, also the fact that a man ostensibly looking for the perpetuation of life because he's an altruistic goal, he treats the cadavers like trash. He has no regard for anyone. They are all just things he is going to use. And his financing comes from an arms dealer, you know? And
like the Nobel Prize.
Yes, or like the Nobel Prize. Yeah. So the idea for me was to bring this to light through the character of Harlander, but also to if we can, not to create a villain, which Christoph is a good decoy for that. But he's not a villain, he's another victim. I wanted the only antagonist needed to be Victor.
See, when I think the sections of the movie, and watching it a few times, especially going to see it again in the theater, that really affect me are when we feel the pain of the monster that he can't articulate in any way. When he's trapped in that castle and it's falling down. I mean, we really, all of the sounds around him are basically almost like the cries of infants.
Yes.
At some point, the pitch suggests that
he does come out through a birth canal. It's not very subtle. It does come out through it, but. The idea for me was very simple. The way the screenplay is constructed, there's a dichotomy that works very well. Victor's life quest ends the day the creature's life begins. So they are impossible to reconcile. The creature wants to know everything. Victor wants nothing more. He never thought past the point of creation, which happens.
It was funny because the birth of the being to me, because Victor is a teenager. I mean, in that operating theater, he's acting like a teenager.
Yes.
He's basically staring at the beauty of his own hands.
Yes.
And the gestures, how I move so well. And he throws his hair back as if he's waiting for applause from the theater.
Yeah.
And once the being exists, he no longer has a function.
Yes.
I mean, that's almost like a classic father.
Well, I have found through horrible experience that bad parenting is treating your kids like an accessory. That is there to make you look good or make you look bad, right? That is, I remember when things went well, my father would say, "You're my kids," and when they went wrong, he would tell my mother, "Look what your children are doing," But that said, the construction of the creature necessitated three big gestures, which were very important. You could not design the creature to look like an accident victim. It needed to not look like a patch repair job. He needed to look like a newly minted human soul. So more than a baby, like a being that was new. So that the destruction of something that was born new was more painful. The second part was to give him the vocabulary with the price it has. The only word he needs to name everything in the world is Victor, because that Victor is his all. Then he learns a second word, Elizabeth. Things get more complicated when he learns the word friend. And the more words he learns, the more doubts and pain.
The more pain he feels.
The more pain. And so every time he gains knowledge, it comes with pain. He pays the price with pain, which is absolutely the way you learn. But the fact for me
that certainly explains your movies to me now.
Well, yeah. But that's why the moment of grace at the end has no words. It's him delivering himself to the Son and being one with that, because that is grace. The world is a brutal place, but the sun will rise no matter what. I mean, one of the books I love the most in the Bible is the book of Job. And basically, Job says to God, why? And God says, why not? Why shouldn't it? What do you know about the rhythms of the cosmos, which I created? Who are you to ask me that question?
You're a lesser being.
You're a lesser being. And then the creature delivers itself to that grace. And the son, both on Pinocchio and on Frankenstein, by the way, almost the same ending.
I was going to say, not only the same ending, but almost the same beginning.
and almost the same ending than Kronos, by the way, is the son delivering. And that to me is... that doesn't necessitate words. But the third element for the creature to work is for him not to understand, not to grasp pain, love, or forgiveness until he decides to do it. Like he needs to enact it after going through everything. I think that the need for forgiveness is urgent. The need for forgiveness and grace is urgent into making us human.
It's funny because I was thinking about the sort of line that I would draw from Kronos to Hellboy to Pinocchio to this. I mean, they all begin kind of similarly, and the monster has to recognize. Monster. This thing perceived as a monster.
Yeah.
In each case, there's something that's perceived as a monster.
Yeah.
And that's something the creature, the being, has to learn itself to recognize that it is not a monster, which is where the pain comes in.
It is what it is. I mean, we are who we are. I think that the problem we have is the first split we have is that we understand the world by dichotomies. Good. When you say something's good, you are by reference, inference, saying something's bad. When you say something is beautiful, by inference, there must be something somewhere that is ugly. So the comprehension of the world through dichotomy is what keeps us apart. And I think monsters, to me, bridge that. They carry no lies. That's what was liberating to me as a child. When I saw the monsters, those were saints I could understand. Those were saints that were not. They were what they were, and you love them as they were or not. And I think that the seeking of perfection, I think we should all actively fight for imperfection. But the fact that imperfection is shame, and perfection is desirable, is as constrictive and suffocating as the idea of love having to be perfect, or love having to imply forcible change. Beauty and the Beast, to me, is horrible. I would like Beast and the Beast. I like a princess kissing the frog to turn into a frog. That's a happy ending for me.
I think that's probably Brett Ratner's Melania documentary. But you liked it. But as you're talking about this thing I find myself thinking about, which also runs through the poets, is shame is education, so coming to recognize your place in the world. And that happens in all these movies. It happens in Pinocchio, in Kronos,
and
Hellboy, and in this. And I want to ask you about, because this idea that knowledge is a painful thing, I've never seen it more profoundly sort of like rendered in the movie than in this Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that you have a character that has all the words he thinks he needs, which is Victor, and they're all hollow. And yet the creature has many less words, but they all mean something to that creature. And I do think that at one point in the race to apprehend the universe, the Noam Chomsky line that says the limit of your vocabulary is the limit of your universe comes to play. But the creature gaining all this and gaining it through the wisdom of the old man that says to know who hurt you, why they hurt you, and forgive, that is a true measure of wisdom. And like the novel, the creature acquires a very literary language, and that was also necessitated some tricks. And when I talk to tricks, I mean, the novel has many tricks, and I love them. I love Mary Shelley never, ever telling you what the secret of life is. Never. She says, she does it fantastically. She says, and Victor says in the novel, and there it was, right before my eyes, something that had never been revealed to anyone, and it was being revealed to me. And it was so simple and yet magnificent. I mean, she never tells you what it is. She alludes at alchemy, she alludes at galvanism, she alludes at, she talks about an infernal machine, but she never tells you how life is conferred into the creature. One trick I needed was how to take the creature from articulate back to inarticulate, back to articulate. And what I did is he learns the words, he starts to use them, he starts to gain memory, and then he gets shot in the throat. So he loses the articulation for the first re-encounter with Victor and Elizabeth. And then as it heals, it becomes more and more articulate until he is able to question his father at the end.
We could go on for this for another couple of days, but I guess we should let you leave. Let's thank Guillermo del Toro for
that went fast. Thank you very much. Oh, God damn it. Well, thank you. I will take you over for cookies and milk, but it's a lot of people. Thank you very much. See you on the street.